June was a fantastic reading month for me. I think it was my third best of the year so far. Almost second place, but not quite. I read a bunch of awesome books, mostly queer as well for Pride Month, so let's get into it. So for June, I read 10 books, which totaled up to 3,496 pages with 36 hours of audiobooks in there. Of those 10, I owned 3 of them, and the rest were either library books or from Scribd or Audible, that kind of thing. The first book that I read was actually a carryover from May. I read Crown of Feathers by Nicki Preto. I read the majority of it in June though, so it's going towards my June stats. This was excellent. I loved this book. This one is a YA fantasy about Phoenix writers who were attempted to be killed off by the government after a war took place like 16-ish years ago, and they've been trying to rebuild ever since. And the main character, she wants to be a Phoenix writer, but they only accept boys right now, so she pretends to be a boy in order to get in. There's a whole lot more to it than just that, but that's like the basic gist of it. This was so good. It's multi-POV, it was interesting, there was fantastic characters. I loved the plot line of it. One of the POVs I didn't really care about for the longest time, but towards the end of it, once all of the POVs kind of met up in the middle, it got real interesting real quick. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed this one and I can't wait to get to the sequels of it, and I gave it 4 stars. After that, I read Arrival Most Vile by R.K. Ashwick. This was so good. This is one of those books that had me like kicking in my feet and squealing, and just it brought me so much joy. I read this book with the Cozy Quill book club over on Fable. I'll link it down below if you want to check that out. But this one is a queer fantasy romance about a potion shop owner who's been living in this town for most of his life. He was dropped off there by his parents as a very young boy, and he was raised to be the apprentice to the potion shop, and now he's been running it for the last 20 years. And then one day a new potion shop opens up directly across the street and chaos ensues from there. These two become so petty towards each other, and they're like constantly trying to sabotage each other, but because it's such a small town, they have all the same friends, and so they eventually start to become friends and eventually into something more. This book was so sweet. It made me so incredibly happy to read it. I read this book in like I think maybe 2 days. I couldn't stop reading it. I couldn't put it down, and whenever I couldn't read it I was thinking about it. Like it just brought me so much joy, and I hope everybody reads this book. I wish it was a series, but sadly it's just the one book plus a couple of short stories, but I would kill to have more books set in this world. There are so many characters. It had this beautiful found family element to it as well. It made me cry. I'm a sucker for found family, and this book did it so well. It was so perfectly my kind of book, and I gave it a full 5 stars. The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston was another fantastic read. This one is a contemporary romance with a bit of a fantasy twist to it. So the main character, her aunt has just passed away a few months ago, and she inherited her aunt's apartment, and growing up her aunt was always telling her all these stories about how the apartment is magical, and every once in a while she would come home and open the door and all of a sudden she'd be 7 years in the past. Of course the main character doesn't believe her until one day 6 months after her aunt has passed away. She comes home, opens the door, and there's a strange man living in her house, and all of her aunt's belongings are back, and she realizes that she has gone 7 years into the past. And the story goes from there. This was such an incredible book. Like the romance itself was fantastic. It was very well done. I loved the chemistry between the characters. I loved the dual timelines as well, because like for him this romance happened 7 years ago, but for her it's happening right now. So it was a really interesting sort of thing between the two of them. It was handled so perfectly. I love the friendships between the love interest and his friends and his family, as well as the main character and her best friends, and her learning how to be vulnerable with the people that she's known for so long but has never felt able to express herself until recently. But mostly it was the depictions of grief that just gut punched me. Like, oh man. In the author's note, Ashley Poston said that she had written the first draft of this book quite a while ago, but then it was either like her uncle or her grandfather, or it was somebody in her family who she was very close to, passed away when she went to go do the second draft of this book, and she channeled all of her grief into this book and into this character, and you can really tell the grief in this book felt so tangible. It was heartbreaking and felt so real. It had me crying pretty much from page 1. There were lots of laughs in this book as well too. It was hilarious, and like the banter between the main character and the love interest was fantastic. But the grief is just like oh, it was on another level. It was fantastic. This definitely isn't a book for everybody, I think. I think if you have a hard time reading about grief and like loss of family or loved ones, that you'd probably have a hard time reading this book because of how real it feels. But if you can handle that, do it. This was such a good book. I gave it 5 stars, and it also solidified Ashley Poston as being one of my favorite authors of all time. I will read anything that she writes from now on. Next up was Content Warning Everything by Akwaeke Emezi. I read this one for the May Buzzword Challenge because I forgot to do it in May, so I did it in June. This is a book of poetry. Honestly, I have no idea how to like review or rate poetry. I'm really bad at it. I don't really know how to explain what it's about, so I'm just not gonna do that. But I did like it for the most part. I found some of the poems like didn't quite resonate with me, but most of them did, so I ended up giving it a 3.5 star. Then I got to The World We Make by N.K. Jemisin and finished up The Great Cities duology. This is such a cool series. I don't really know if it's sci-fi or fantasy. It's kind of a combination of the two, but basically all major cities in the world at some point when they become old enough and they mature enough, they will be born, and they do that by selecting a person or multiple people who represent the city itself to become the avatar of the city, and they start to be able to hear and see and feel every single person in that city. And every time a city is born, there's some kind of ancient eldritch monster thing trying to destroy it, and if they survive, then they become a full-fledged city. But if they don't survive it, then they become cities like Atlantis or Pompeii, where they have some sort of like natural disaster or fall into myth, that kind of thing. So this book is the story of New York being born, and because New York has 5 boroughs, it has 5 avatars plus a 6th one that is like the city as a whole, and it's the 6 of them having to work together to figure out how to defeat this monster. This was so good. If you like the show Sense8, which that's my favorite show in the entire world, then you'll love this series. You should definitely pick it up. If you're a fan of Sense8, please just do it. I do understand what people mean when they talk about book 2. This was supposed to be a trilogy, but N.K. Jemisin chose to make it into a duology. I kind of forget why. I think she said why in the author's note, but either way, this didn't quite feel finished. It felt like there should have been so much more to it, and especially the climax of the story, like right near the end, it just kind of went nowhere. Like it was building up to be this huge epic thing, and then it was just like, actually never mind, bye, and like peaced out. It was being set up to be something super cool at the end, and then the characters just like left and went somewhere else instead of this really cool thing happening. And that was a huge letdown, because like the thing that was going to be set up was going to be so cool. That would have been such a great scene to have, especially to end this series off, but like it just didn't happen, and I'm very sad about that, because like again, that just would have been so cool. So I liked how the book wrapped up. Like the last like 10 to 20 pages was great, but like the actual climax of the book in the last like 50 pages was not great. I still gave it a 4 star though, because I love the characters in this book. I love the relationships between them and the story behind it. The writing is amazing. I love the setting and the atmosphere of it. You feel New York in the pages of this book. It's just such a beautiful love letter to the city. So overall, I loved it. It was just the ending that wasn't quite what I wanted it to be, but either way, still a great series. I then read Bang Bang Bodhisattva by Aubrey Wood. This one is a cyberpunk noir thriller. The main character is a trans woman. She's a hacker, and she ends up running into some trouble where a couple of her friends end up getting killed, and at each scene there is a stick of burnt incense left behind. The cops think that she did it, so she has to figure out what's going on in order to clear her name. And also find one of her friends who's missing. This was such a good book. It was so beautifully queer as well. So the main character, again, she's a trans woman, and she's also in a polyamorous throuple. And there's lots of other queer characters in here as well. Like most of the side characters are queer. And aside from the like really cool mystery elements of it, there's also like some great technology in here. It has that like neon city feeling to it. Ooh, fire alarm. We will continue in a moment. Okay, we're good. No crisis. I forget what I was saying now, but either way, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so interesting. I'm not usually a mystery kind of person, but put it in a setting like this one and I am so here for it. I love the relationship between the main character and the friend who's helping her the most. He's a former cop turned private investigator. He's also quite a bit older as well too, so like their relationship is really fun. She's 30, but I think he's in like his 50s, maybe 60s, and they just have this like really funny like father-daughter kind of relationship, and they're constantly like poking fun at each other and just getting on each other's nerves, and it's such a sweet kind of relationship. I loved it. That was definitely the best part of this book. And this one I also gave 4 stars. And I picked up a nonfiction for Pride Month. That one was Miss Major Speaks by Toshio, Meronek, and Miss Major. That's just a conversation between Miss Major and her friend Toshio. Miss Major is a black trans revolutionary who's been huge in the LGBT rights movement since I think the 60s. She's a Stonewall veteran. She's been doing grassroots movements for decades. She's made such a huge impact for queer people all over the world. It just got weirdly dark in here. Okay. Sun, do you want to come back maybe? Okay, hopefully that's a bit better. Is that better? It's kind of better. Oh, now it's getting bright again. God damn it. But yeah, this really just felt like a conversation between 2 friends talking about Miss Major's life and all of the things she's done, the places she's been, the things she's seen. It was so good. She had some very hot takes on her opinions on things like Pride and Stonewall that I think every queer person, especially every white queer person, should definitely read. This was a great book to read during Pride Month. It really got me thinking quite a bit, and I gave it a 4.5 star. Then I picked up The Queer Principles of Kit Webb by Sebastian. This one is a queer historical romance. It's about the son of a duke, maybe, I think. Recently his mother passed away and he thinks that his father has something to do with it, so he wants to hire a highwayman to rob him and try and figure out what's going on. And the only one whose name he actually knows is somebody who was recently injured, so he's not able to do his job anymore, and now he instead runs a cafe tavern type thing. I love the setting for this. Picture the hotel from John Wick, but instead make it into a cozy tavern setting, and that's kind of what you have with this one. It was awesome. But yeah, so instead of being able to actually do the job for him, he decides to teach him how to do it himself, and the story goes from there. It's a romance, so I'm sure you can figure out what happens. But I loved this one. It's also a series as well. I think it's just 2 books right now. Hopefully there'll be more later on. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It was so cute, so sweet. The friendships were fantastic. It was also very steamy and very well written. And I gave out another 4 star. And then for a not so great one, I read Mortal Follies by Alexis Hall. This one is a queer historical fantasy romance. I'm really in the mood for historical romance right now, if you can't tell. So this one, I was interested in it because it's a sapphic historical romance, and I also like this author. I read, I think, Boyfriend Material, I think it's called, like years ago, and I love that book. It was so good. So I want to read all of their other books as well too, and this was my 2nd book by them, and it was not good. So the good part of it is that it's narrated by a hobgoblin, and that was hysterical. Like, the hobgoblin narrator is living in our time. She's talking about like having to do all these horrible human things like paying rent and standing in line for food, and it's horrible and awful and she hates it. And in order to pay rent, she had to get a job, so now she's working at a publishing house and is writing this book, and that's how the story came to be. So the whole narrator part and all of her commentary was hilarious. I genuinely loved that part of it. It was honestly the only reason why I kept reading it, but everything else about it was not good. So the story she's telling is about this girl who's been cursed. She has no idea who cursed her or why, and she's trying to uncurse herself. So she goes to ask for help from somebody who lives in town who's thought to be a witch. Things go from there. The plot itself was fine. Like, it wasn't that good, but it was like, it was readable at least. But where it really fell flat for me was the romance. I found the romance to be so cringy and honestly uncomfortable. The love interest, she does say to the main character many times that she is interested in her. So like, I'm not saying that things were not consensual, but they still didn't feel very consensual, because like, while the love interest was saying that she was interested in her, she was also saying that she didn't want to pursue anything with her. Multiple times said that nothing was going to happen between them, and being interested in somebody does not mean that they have your consent. But the main character just kept like throwing herself at her over and over again and getting like increasingly more demanding, and like, she wouldn't talk to her about anything else aside from how badly she wanted to sleep with her. It was just really uncomfortable, and I didn't enjoy that at all. It was not cute. It was again, very cringy, very awkward, and yeah, just overall not a great read. Aside from the narrator, everything else really wasn't good. So I gave it a 2 star, 2.5 if I'm being generous, but like probably a 2. And the last book that I picked up in June was The First to Die at the End by Silvera. This book broke me, as I knew it would, but still. This is the prequel to They Both Die at the End, which I read a couple of years ago and adored. That first book had me sobbing from page 1 to the very end, and it did not stop the entire time. This is like a gut-wrench of a book, and book 2 is not as emotional but still had me sobbing. This one I read for Tome Topple, and it's a contemporary romance with like a bit of a sci-fi twist to it. Basically, there is somebody who has figured out a way to know exactly when people are going to die. He's called a death cast, and so every day between midnight and 2 a.m. they make phone calls, and if you get a phone call from death cast, then you are going to die. It has a 100% accuracy rate. There is no way to avoid it. You are going to die. You can try and hide from it, and no matter what happens, you're not going to escape it. Nobody knows how it works or how they have this information, but they do know that it works. And so the prequel, it takes place on the day that Deathcast is launched, and it follows two main characters. The one has a chronic heart condition and the other one has just moved to New York, like it's literally his first day there, and the two meet in Times Square at the like launch party for Deathcast. And the story goes from there. It was a beautiful, incredibly sad, heartbreaking story. Nothing but pain. It was so good. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to like give away spoilers at all. I think this is a book where you should go in pretty much blind and just kind of enjoy the ride of it. It was so good and so sweet and so sad. I love this book. I gave it a 4.5 stars. I've tried other books by this author and I haven't loved anything else from him yet, but these two books are where it's at. They're so good. So yeah, those are all the books that I read in June. Let me know what you read last month, or if you read any of the books that I did, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts as well. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys later on.